It started with a letter I wasn't supposed to take personally, but somehow it felt like it was aimed straight at my chest, cold, official, stamped with just enough authority to make it sound final, like someone had already decided how the story ended without bothering to ask me how it began. The envelope came in on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a feed catalog and a property tax notice, and I almost didn't open it right away, figured it was just another piece of paperwork I'd deal with after checking on the cruise. But something about it, maybe the weight, maybe the way my name was typed instead of printed, I don't know, it made me stop right there by the kitchen counter and tear it open. And that's when everything shifted. According to the Homeowners Association of Pine Hollow Ridge, a place I didn't even live in. By the way, my timber operation was in violation of their community standards. Not potentially. Not under review. In violation. Immediate cease of activity required. Equipment to be removed. Operations suspended pending further notice. It was written in that neat, detached tone people use when they want to sound reasonable while doing something completely unreasonable. No call beforehand. No conversation. No heads up. Just a decision, handed down like they owned more than their own fences. I remember standing there, reading it twice, then a third time, like maybe I'd missed something between the lines, like there had to be a page 2 where they explained why they thought they could tell me what to do on land I'd owned for over 15 years. But there wasn't. Just signatures, legal language, and that quiet assumption that I'd comply. I drove out to the north section right after that. Took me about 20 minutes, gravel crunching under the tires the whole way, dust trailing behind like something was already burning down. And when I got there, the machines were still running, chainsaws echoing through the trees, men doing what they'd been hired to do. Honest work, clean cuts, everything by the book. My foreman, Dale, spotted me pulling up and walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You look like you just swallowed a nail," he said. I handed him the letter. He read it slower than I did, brow tightening with every line, then let out a low whistle. They serious with this? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He looked out toward the ridge, where the houses of Pine Hollow sat just beyond the tree line. Neat rooftops lined up like they were posing for a brochure. They don't own this land. I know that. You know that. Apparently they don't. We stood there for a moment, listening to the hum of machinery, the rhythm of something real, something productive. And then I said the thing I didn't want to say. "Shut it down." Dale blinked. "You sure? For now? I don't want them pulling something legal while we're mid-operation. Let's pause it, figure out what game they're playing." He nodded, not happy about it. But he trusted me. And within the hour, the saws went quiet. Engines powered down. One by one, the crew packed up, confusion written all over their faces. A few of them asked what was going on, and I gave them the short version. Paperwork issue, temporary hold. The kind of answer that doesn't really answer anything. And just like that, weeks of planning, contracts lined up, weather windows carefully calculated frozen. Now here's the thing about land, especially land like mine. It's not just dirt and trees. It's time. It's history. My father bought that acreage when it was nothing but overgrown brush and bad soil, and he spent years turning it into something workable. I grew up out there, learned how to read the wind before I learned how to read a book. So when someone who's never set foot past their own deck starts telling me what I can and can't do with it, yeah, it hits different. That afternoon, I called the number on the letter, got routed through 2 menus and 1 assistant before I finally landed on someone named Karen Whitfield, president of the Pine Hollow HOA. Her voice was smooth, controlled, the kind of voice that never raises but always expects to be listened to. "Mr. Carter," she said, "we've received multiple concerns from residents regarding the visual impact and environmental disruption caused by your logging activity." "Your residents," I said, "are looking at trees on my property." "Those trees," she replied, "directly affect the aesthetic and value of our community." I almost laughed at that, not because it was funny, but because it was so cleanly absurd. "With all due respect, Karen, your community doesn't get a vote on what happens on my land." There was a pause, not long, but enough to tell me she wasn't used to hearing that. "We believe," she said carefully, "that your operations may fall under shared access and environmental guidelines outlined in the Regional Development Agreement." "Then you should read that agreement again," I said, keeping my tone level, "because I already have." Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Well," she said, "until this is resolved." We expect full compliance with the notice. And there it was, expectation. Not request. Not negotiation. Expectation. I'll be reviewing everything on my end, I told her. But I don't take orders from people who don't own the ground they're standing on. She didn't respond to that. Just ended the call with a polite, tight goodbye that felt more like a line drawn in the sand. That night, I sat at my desk with every document I had: land deeds, access rights, environmental clearances, contracts, spread out like pieces of a puzzle I already knew the answer to but needed to prove anyway. And the more I looked, the clearer it became. I hadn't done anything wrong. Not legally, not ethically, not even by their own standards, if they were being honest. Which they weren't. Because this wasn't about rules, not really. It was about control. About a group of people who built something new next to something old and decided the old thing needed to change. But what they didn't realize, what they couldn't see from their manicured streets and seasonal wreaths, was that my land wasn't just sitting next to theirs. It was holding something they depended on, something quiet, something easy to overlook until it wasn't. And that's the part they hadn't figured out yet. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was worried, not exactly, but because something in the back of my mind kept turning, like a gear trying to catch. You know that feeling when you're looking at a situation and it doesn't quite add up, like there's a piece missing but you can't see where it fits yet? Yeah, that. So instead of forcing it, I let it sit, let it breathe, and by morning I decided I wasn't going to rush anything. If they wanted to play this slow and official, I could do the same, maybe slower. Over the next few days, I kept the operation paused, even though every instinct I had was telling me to fire it back up and dare them to do something about it. But I didn't, because sometimes the strongest move isn't pushing forward, it's stepping back just enough to see the whole board. And while things stayed quiet on my end, I started paying closer attention to theirs. Pine Hollow Ridge wasn't some massive development, maybe 40 homes, give or take, all tucked into that slope just past my northern line. Nice houses, I'll give them that. Clean siding, polished driveways, the kind of place where people wave but don't really stop to talk. It had that new money meets quiet retreat feel. People who wanted nature, but only the version of it they could control. I drove through there one afternoon just to get a sense of things. Not looking for trouble, just observing. Nobody stopped me. Nobody questioned why I was there. I was just another truck rolling slowly past trimmed hedges and mailboxes that all looked like they came from the same catalog. But what caught my eye wasn't the houses, it was the road. Or more specifically, where their road ended. See, Pine Hollow had one main access point that connected to the county road down by Miller's Bend, but that route? It wound through a low valley that turned into a mess every winter. Flooding, ice, fallen branches, it wasn't reliable once the weather turned. Anyone who'd been out here long enough knew that. Which is why, years ago, before Pine Hollow even existed, my father had carved out a secondary access path, what eventually became my logging road. It cut across the higher ridge of my property, stayed dry, stayed stable, and over time, without much discussion, it became the unofficial backup route for anyone in that area when conditions got bad. No signs, no agreements, just an understanding. One of those quiet rural things where people use what works and don't make a fuss about it. Until now, I parked near the bend where their paved road met the edge of my land, stepped out, and just stood there for a minute. You could see it clearly, their neat asphalt ending right where my gravel began, like two different worlds stitched together without much thought. And that's when it clicked. Not all at once, more like a slow realization settling into place. They had authority on paper, sure, committees, bylaws, all the language that makes people feel secure. But when winter hit, when that valley road iced over or washed out, the only reliable way in or out of Pine Hollow Ridge was through my property, through that logging road. I actually let out a quiet breath when I saw it clearly, not a laugh, not satisfaction exactly, just clarity. Because suddenly, this whole situation wasn't about who was right or wrong anymore. It was about leverage, and they didn't know they'd already given it to me. Now here's where a lot of people would have reacted fast, maybe blocked the road right then, made a statement, forced a confrontation. But that's not how I was raised to handle things. My father used to say, if someone's walking toward a mistake, you don't have to push them, just don't get in their way. So I didn't. I went back home, poured a cup of coffee, and let things play out. Over the next week, the temperature started to drop. Not dramatically at first, just enough to remind you that the season was turning. Mornings came with a sharper edge, frost settling on the ground like a warning. And with that shift, I started noticing little things, snow markers appearing along Pine Hollow's roads, trucks getting checked, conversations happening in driveways that felt a little more serious than usual. They were preparing. Of course they were. Anyone out here knows you don't wait for winter to show up before you get ready for it. But what they didn't seem to realize, or maybe just didn't think about, was how dependent that preparation was on access. On my road, Dale came by the house one evening, sat across from me at the kitchen table, still not thrilled about the shutdown. "So what's the plan?" he asked, leaning back in his chair. "We just gonna let them push us around?" I shook my head. "No, we're gonna let them understand what they did." He frowned. "That sounds like a long game." "It is." He studied me for a second, then nodded slowly. "All right, I trust you. Just don't like seeing good work sit idle." "Neither do I said. "But sometimes idle is louder than action." He didn't argue with that, just finished his coffee and headed out. And then we waited. The first real snowfall came in fast. One of those storms that doesn't ease in, just drops everything at once like the sky finally gave up holding it. By morning, the landscape was buried under a thick, heavy layer of snow that turned everything quiet. Roads, fields, even sound itself felt muffled. I drove out early, before the county plows had made their rounds. The valley road? Already a mess. Slush underneath, ice forming on top. Not something you'd want to rely on. But up on the ridge, my road was still solid. Snow-covered, sure, but the base held. It always did. And I left it exactly like that. Untouched. By midday, I saw the first Pine Hollow truck come up to the edge, a plow attached, engine running, driver sitting there like he was waiting for permission that wasn't coming. He didn't cross onto my land. Didn't try to push through. Just sat there. Then eventually turned around and headed back. That evening, my phone rang. Didn't need to check the caller ID. "Mr. Carter," Karen's voice came through, still controlled, but there was something new underneath it. "Tension. We're experiencing some access issues due to the storm," she said. "Our crews need to use the ridge road to clear a safe path for residents." I let a second pass, not out of spite, just to make sure my words landed right. "The ridge road," I said, "runs through my property." "Yes," she replied, "which is why we're requesting temporary access." "Temporary access," I repeated, "to the same property you shut down 3 days ago." Silence. Not long, but enough. "This is a matter of safety," she said, her tone tightening just a fraction. "We have families who need reliable access. And I had a crew who needed to work," I said evenly. Didn't seem to matter much then. Another pause. "We're willing to discuss your operation once immediate concerns are addressed." I almost smiled at that. The shift was subtle, but it was there. From authority to negotiation. "Funny how priorities change," I said. "Mr. Carter, I'm not blocking anything." I cut in calmly. "I'm just not doing anything either. Same as you asked me to." That landed. Harder than if I'd raised my voice. She didn't respond right away, and when she did, the edge was gone, replaced by something closer to careful. "We'll be in touch," she said. And then the line went dead. I set the phone down, looked out the window at the snow settling across the fields, and for the first time since that letter arrived, I felt like things were exactly where they needed to be, because now they were starting to see it. By the second storm, there wasn't any pretending left, no more polite distance, no more carefully worded emails that tried to sound neutral while nudging things their way. The snow came down harder that time, heavier, the kind that doesn't just sit on top of the ground but settles in, packs tight, turns roads into something closer to memory than reality. And Pine Hollow Ridge, for all its clean lines and tidy driveways, started to feel a lot smaller than it used to. I drove up to the edge again that morning, same spot where their pavement met my gravel, and it looked different now. Not physically, not really, but in the way people had started to gather there. 2 trucks, 1 plow, a couple of residents standing off to the side with their hands buried deep in their jackets, talking in low voices like they were trying not to make the situation more real than it already was. Nobody crossed onto my land. They didn't have to. The line was clear enough. I stayed in my truck for a minute, engine idling, just watching. Not out of arrogance, more like taking stock. Because this wasn't about winning anything. It was about understanding how we got here. How something that could have been a simple conversation turned into this quiet standoff in the middle of winter. When I stepped out, a few of them noticed right away. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. And then Karen appeared, walking up from the cluster near the plow truck. Boots crunching through the snow, posture still composed but no longer distant. There was no clipboard this time. No assistant. Just her. "Mr. Carter," she said, stopping a few feet short of the boundary. "Karen." For a second, neither of us said anything. The wind moved through the trees behind me, carrying that low, hollow sound winter makes when it's settled in for a while. Then she exhaled, just slightly, like she was letting go of something she'd been holding on to. "We need to resolve this," she said. I nodded once. "Yeah, we do." She glanced back at the road behind her, where the snow had already started to build up again even after their last attempt to clear it. "The lower route is unusable. We've got residents who haven't been able to leave since yesterday. Emergency services are concerned about response times." I figured as much. Her eyes came back to me, sharper now, but not defensive, more like direct. "You understand what's at stake here." "I do," I said. I understood it before the first snow fell. That landed. You could see it in the way her jaw tightened, just for a second. "This wasn't meant to escalate like this," she said. "The complaints we received, they were consistent. People were worried about erosion, about property values, about the long-term impact of large-scale logging so close to the community. And instead of talking to me, I replied, keeping my tone steady, "You shut it down." "We acted within the authority we believed we had." "Believed," I repeated quietly. She didn't push back on that. Didn't argue the word. Just let it sit there between us, cold as the air. Behind her, one of the residents called out, asking if there was any update, his voice carrying that edge of frustration people get when they've been stuck too long. Karen glanced back, then turned to me again. "We're prepared to revisit the notice," she said, more carefully now. "If there are clarifications to be made regarding your compliance, we're open to reviewing them immediately." I couldn't help it. I let out a small breath through my nose. Not quite a laugh, but close. "Clarifications," I said. "That's one way to put it." She held my gaze. Didn't flinch. I'll give her that she didn't fold easy. Even now, standing in a situation she didn't fully control anymore, she kept her footing. "What do you want, Mr. Carter?" And there it was, not dressed up, not softened. Just the question that should have been asked from the beginning. I took a second before answering, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted it to be clear. "I want to finish my work," I said. "No interference, no surprise notices, no shifting interpretations of agreements you didn't bother to read the first time. You've got concerns? You bring them to me directly. We talk. Like neighbors. Not like opposing sides in a paperwork war." She listened without interrupting, eyes steady, expression unreadable for a moment, then something in it shifted. Not defeat, not quite. More like recognition. "And in return?" she asked. "In return," I said, gesturing lightly toward the road behind me, "your crews can use the ridge access. Same as always. No barriers, no conditions, just understanding." Another pause, longer this time. You could almost hear the weight of it settling, not just between us, but across everyone standing there watching, waiting to see which way this was going to go. Finally, she nodded. "All right," she said. "We'll rescind the notice, effective immediately. I'll have the board issue a formal statement by the end of the day." I gave a small nod back. "Then we're done here." But before she turned away, she added, quieter now, almost to herself, but not quite. "We should have handled this differently." I met her eyes for a second. "Yeah," I said. "You should have." There wasn't any handshake. No dramatic resolution. Just an understanding, the kind that doesn't need ceremony because everyone involved already knows what it cost to get there. I stepped aside then, just enough, and gave a short nod toward the road. That was all it took. The driver in the plow truck started it up again, engine roaring back to life, and slowly, carefully, they crossed onto my land. No one stopped them. No one said a word. And just like that, the standoff ended. Over the next few days, things settled into a rhythm again. The crews came back, saw us cutting through timber with that familiar, steady sound. Snow got cleared when it needed to be, access stayed open, and Pine Hollow. Well, Pine Hollow got a little quieter. Not in a bad way, just less certain of itself, maybe, less quick to assume. Dale stopped by once we were back up and running, watched the operation for a while before turning to me with a grin. "Guess they figured it out, huh?" Eventually, I said. He nodded. Funny how that works. Not really, I replied. People see what they need to see, when they need to see it. He laughed at that, clapped me on the shoulder, and headed back toward the equipment. And me? I just stood there for a bit, looking out over the land. Same trees, same road, same sky stretching out above it all. Nothing had changed, and yet something had. Because here's the thing, this was never about proving a point. Not really. It wasn't about winning against the HOA or teaching anyone a lesson just for the sake of it. It was about balance. About understanding where authority ends and reality begins, and how easy it is to confuse the two when you're used to being listened to. They thought power came from rules, from signatures, from documents, from the idea that if something's written down, it must be true. But power, real power, is quieter than that. It's in knowing how things actually work. It's in understanding the systems people rely on without thinking about them. And sometimes, it's in doing nothing at all, just long enough for the consequences to speak for you. Now, I could tell you this ended perfectly, that everyone walked away better, wiser, more connected. And maybe that's partly true, but not entirely. Because even after everything settled, even after the road stayed open and the work moved forward, there was still a kind of distance there. Not hostility, not anymore. Just awareness. Like both sides had seen something they couldn't unsee. They knew now that control has limits. And I knew that sometimes those limits only show up when someone pushes far enough to find them. So here's what I'll leave you with. If you were in my position, would you have handled it the same way? Would you have waited, let the situation unfold? Or would you have pushed back the moment that letter hit your hand? And on the other side of it, were they wrong for stepping in the way they did, or just trying to protect what they believed was theirs? Because out here, lines aren't always as clear as they look on paper. And sometimes, the real boundary isn't the one on the map. It's the one people don't realize they've crossed until it's too late. Let me know what you think.